Hello, I'm Nader Yusupov, and this is an episode of Leaders and Engineers. We are broadcasting from Finland. Today, our guest is an experienced space technology professional, engineer, and scientist. He is a Bachelor in Electronics, Master of Science in Space Technology, and PhD candidate. With over 10 years of experience in researching space weather, engineering space instruments, and other technologies, and developing space missions. He worked with such institutions and companies as Aalto University, Finnish Meteorological Institute, and European Space Agency. He is one of the owners of patent for the Spacecraft Propulsion system and recipient of award for high-quality teaching from Aalto University. He is living in Finland and working now as a research team lead in Aurora Propulsion Technologies, a company that's developing spacecraft propulsion systems, and working also as a project manager for Dreiliner ESA, a project to develop tether-based deorbiting mechanism. Please meet Pyry Lauri Samuli Peitso.
Thank you for having me here.
So how are you doing?
Fine. Quite busy over at work, but fine.
I really appreciate that you are here amidst your busy schedule. And
I maybe have to correct a bit on the introduction that I'm not actually haven't worked at ESA. We are working on an ESA project, but I'm not actually employed by the European Space Agency.
Yeah, thank you for correcting. I was saying that with European Space. Sorry. But this is fine. And I think we will talk more about that later on also. And maybe you could tell more about the work you're doing in regards to the space technology.
Of course.
And but how I suggest we do this is to make some kind of a format like it's a mock-up of a job interview.
Mm-hmm.
And we will imagine that you're applying for a company.
Mm-hmm.
The company doesn't exist, and it's producing something which doesn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
But you're applying there for the leadership position. And the leadership means either you are as a lead of the research team or lead of the scientists and the engineers. So this is kind of leadership position. So are you ready?
Yes.
Great. By the way, how should I call you? Pyry?
Pyry is fine, yeah.
Great. Hello, Pyry. Thank you for applying for a leadership position in our engineering company. Our company is producing a support system for people traveling the transport if they want to sleep or when they are standing and they want to sleep. And to give you a better understanding, I will show you how it looks like on the picture, but you will see this on your screens. So basically, the helmet, or it's some kind of support for your neck, and then you can relax while you're standing.
Mm-hmm.
So why did you decide to apply for this position?
First of all, I'm very passionate in life about being able to pay for my mortgage while at the same time enjoying some kind of a standard of living that's not horrible, and also doing something that I don't hate. And this position caught my interest because it is something quite new and not exactly in my own area of expertise, but research is research. So I believe that with my experience, I could basically handle this as well as several other R&D projects that I've done. And managing a team of people is also quite similar when it comes to doing basic R&D work and testing and developing basically whatever systems.
What excites you about this product that we are developing?
What excites me? There's let's say a rather wide market for it, because public transportation systems are everywhere and they are used by billions of people daily. So this basically concerns most of humanity in one way or another.
All right. Now let's talk more about your background and your experience. And Your CV looks quite impressive, and but if we go beyond your CV, and what is not mentioned maybe much in your CV, the school time. When you were at school, did you already realize you'll become an engineer or researcher, or at which point you understood what you want to do?
Interesting question. I think I will use the term lukio here because it's not exactly the same as high school, but let's talk about lukio. At the end of lukio, last year of lukio, before you basically graduate from there, and then you start to actually apply for some kind of a educational position or whatever. I hadn't decided on what I exactly wanted to be. There was a heavy push from parents and family towards engineering, but I haven't actually. I hadn't set in what actual field I would like to go for and so on. But then I did decide at roughly that time on space technology, and there were multiple of reasons for that. One of them was that I wanted to do something that I found interesting, something that would have some meaning in it, and something that would be maybe a bit different, because this was in the early 2000s when Nokia was all the rage, and it was on a massive rise, and it was the place to be, the place to go to work for if you were an aspiring engineer at that point. And I was heavily told that you should definitely apply for any kind of telecommunication education, that you could immediately go there and work there and so on. But I somehow found that seemed maybe too much of an easy way out, to take the option that everyone is going to be taking. And I didn't have any specific aspirations for telecommunication or stuff like that. So I sort of stuck to what I found more interesting, as opposed to what was maybe the obvious answer. In the end, that turned out to be a pretty okay move, because Nokia isn't doing that well lately, and we are having a bit of a space technology boom in the world right now, when I'm a bit earlier than I actually entered the job market.
You went for Bachelor of Electronics,
mm-hmm.
and that was dictated by your intention to go to Nokia eventually.
No, not to go to Nokia. That was dictated by my intention to study space technology, because it's under that department.
So you went to Bachelors of Electronics because you knew that you will be in space technology eventually. Okay, so from the very beginning you planned to go to space technology.
Yes.
Okay. But is it that there is no bachelor program, or at that time there was no bachelor program for specifically space technology? It was called electronics.
I'm even so old that at that time there was no bachelor program. Because when I enrolled into TKK, the predecessor of Aalto University, it didn't have a separate program for bachelor's degrees. But nowadays, I don't think that there is a bachelor program for space technology over here. I might be incorrect, but I think it's only restricted to master level studies.
For those people who are not from Finland, could you please elaborate what is the Lukio and how is it different from what you call the school?
Lukio is I think there is a 1 or 2 year discrepancy between Lukio and high school. I think high school ends 1 year later than Lukio. Also, I think from the US high school, you actually do get a bachelor's degree, but you don't of course get it from Lukio. So what would be the actual correct term? Is Lukio is it upper secondary school or something? Not completely sure, but there's a slight discrepancy.
It's 9 classes, 9 grades.
That's the yläaste is to 9th grade, and then there's 3 grades of high school after Lukio after it.
Okay. But moving further in your career and what you did in your life, I also noticed that you were a captain of Team Finland, European Team Championship for 2022, for the 9th Age miniature war game. Could you please tell more about those war games? What does it mean exactly?
It's a miniature war game, meaning that you have actual physical models that you've assembled and painted, and then you play a game with them. It's basically a mixture of role-playing game and like a board game, but it's more like this mass battle game where you have, let's say, hundreds of miniatures, and then you move them on the like a playing area and roll dice and so on.
Hundreds, and how big is the team then?
For a team in this particular event was 8 people per team.
And you had to look at the map, kind of, and then plan. So you basically were given turns, and you had to, for each turn, you had to plan how you move.
Yes.
Okay. Is it kind of similar to this? I don't know, this computer games like Civilization?
In a way, yes.
That you go tile by tile. If it's army unit, then you conquer. Then if it's settler, then you can move and build a city. Is it?
Yeah, similar to that. So it's like in a I go, you go turn-based game where you have like a map and then you move your units around there. So yeah.
Do you still play?
Yes. But
you don't go to these championships anymore?
I couldn't go there this year because I'm getting married. Like the wedding is like thank you, quite close to the event. So there were some like difficult decisions to be made regarding this. But yeah.
I see. But if we talk about your experience where you were captain of the team and you went to this championship, did it help you to develop your leadership skills, which you are now applying at your work, for instance?
I'd say yes, because there's, even though it's like a hobby and we don't do it for anything besides glory and so on, and all the people that we played it with in the team are basically my friends, so I personally know them and so on. Of course, there is some like there are also always some useful skills to be learned from there. And if you're thinking about like, does it help with applying for a job? I think it's always good to show in your CV and so on that you do things besides your work. I think it would be quite frightening to read a CV where there's absolutely nothing besides works there.
So to show a human side that you're not like mechanism.
Yes, exactly.
And continuing about your interesting hobbies, another one is the metal, and that you were chairman of the metal club, MICA, is it correct?
Yes.
Student Association Aalto University. How was that experience? What did you learn from that experience?
That was quite a bit earlier than this latest stint as the team captain. So I would say that was like towards the end of my studies. I think it was in 2010 or something. And with regards to like leadership skills and so on, I think that was quite useful because at that point when you were still studying, you haven't maybe yet done any, let's say, senior positions, of course, in the job market or anything like that. So going to these kind of like student associations and running them is actually pretty good. Like it's like a, how do you say it? Like dress rehearsal for actual like positions in several ways, where you get to run things quite realistically, and there's actual money involved, and there are like responsibility positions and so on. So that's like a purely from a, let's say, work experience point of view, that's fairly useful. Also, it's otherwise fun to do like stuff as your hobbies and so on.
Are you also continuing with this, gathering with the metal club?
I'm not in the like board of directors, but I do occasionally go to their events, and I still like know lots of people from there and so on.
Was the band which won this Eurovision Iron Maiden, I think, right? Was name?
Oh, which year do you mean?
They played metal, I think. They were in those costumes.
Lordi, yeah.
Oh, sorry,
yeah,
Lordi.
Yeah.
Do you like them? Or
well, Lordi is okay.
Oh, this is different kind of metal.
It's a bit more, let's say, mainstream stuff than the underground death metal that is all the rage in Metal Club Mega, but Lordi is still like pretty good music.
So if we divide metal, then you are more into this non-mainstream.
Yeah.
But do you play as well, or you?
Unfortunately, no. I kind of like would like to know to play an instrument, but I only listen to music. I cannot create it myself. I have thought about occasionally like pick up some kind of an instrument, but I never got around to doing it.
When you're dealing with space technology these days, and especially if you talk about radio science, did you like listen to this kind of space music, to those natural and correlate?
Yeah, I have listened to the let's say experimental ambient album of the Voyager probe's signal from its journey into solar system, specifically the solar system one. And I think I've also listened to the interplanetary sounds, which is now like the signal as processed by some kind of audio source. The interplanetary one was that was like noise. That was not very like, but the Voyager, I think there's a YouTube clip which is like several hours long where there are several signals from different like planetary sources and so on. It's quite interesting. It's like, I wouldn't call it exactly maybe music. It's more of this kind of like artwork. But yeah, it was quite interesting.
I think in some cases can be maybe not really metal, but trance music. In this genre, more similar to that. And but you already described that you went to Bachelor of Electronics because you were aiming to work with space technology. This was already from very beginning. So it means in school you have already decided that you will not go as others to Nokia into telecom industry, but you will try this new rising star at the space technology, right?
Basically, yeah. But at that time, it was not exactly like a rising star. It was mostly like, of course, there have been like lots of space technology projects in Finland and so on. But to my like, let's say, freshman eyes, it didn't seem like exactly a rising field with lots of opportunities and so on. But I was simply a freshman student at that time, so I don't think I could have known. It was more like that I found this interesting and I wanted to be studying that.
Okay. But it's actually interesting how those two fields actually connected, this telecom and the space technology. And now there are discussions about 6G. How much do you know about 6G?
Not a whole lot.
But basically, just as a side note, that one of the cases is to bringing to the satellite communication, to the space communication using this 6G. So maybe this is where Nokia will come to you.
Yeah, that's not entirely like impossible. Nokia has also been somewhat involved in some space technology ventures, such as I think that the initiative to put some kind of like a cellular network on the moon. I think that has some Nokia components in it, or at least some levels of that. I don't know the specifics, but there have been some talks about things like that. But of course, communication is one of the major like applications for the whole space technology. So in that sense, it's not too far disconnected from that.
Yeah, indeed. And if we move further in your career, what you did, you did a lot of research with space weather. And probably for many people who are watching and listening us, that will be the question, is it the same as the Earth weather, or there is a difference? So maybe you could clarify what's the difference between Earth and space weather.
Altitude. Like in many ways, like the space weather starts at let's say the high ionosphere or something like that. So it's the same system in the sense that both of them are basically driven by the sun, because in either particles or heat or whatever, that's the like root cause of everything that is happening over there. And I wouldn't like too much disconnect those two from each other. Of course, you are not very concerned about the space weather conditions when you are like driving your car around and thinking if that's like a good idea to go someplace with the car, or should I walk there or whatever. But it's still like both of them are part of the same system. If you would like to, if I could divide them somehow, then like the regular weather affects your everyday life, and let's say traffic is like a good analogy where it goes, and then space weather is perhaps more concerned with the like in orbit space assets, satellites and stuff like that, and how they are affected by the various solar storms and effects like that. But also like aurora borealis is something that everyone can witness when those kind of things happen. That's a purely like cosmetic phenomenon. There's no no adverse effects to any infrastructure related to that.
If you could go deeper into the topic about aurora, I think this is exactly something visible. So it's maybe some kind of like Earth weather, but the impact coming from the space weather.
Mm-hmm.
Could you please, maybe like in simple terms, explain the phenomenon of this aurora?
It's basically atmospheric particles reacting to particles coming in from the sun. So it's like a what's a good term? I would say cosmetic phenomenon, because usually when we talk about space weather, we are concerned about stuff that threatens our infrastructure or causes some kind of harm. It's always negative effects. But auroras are always, it's like only a cosmetic phenomenon.
But is it also some kind of epic battle when our magnetosphere is trying to protect
Epic battle.
from from the attack of those particles? And then this...
Yes, in a sense, if we didn't have the magnetosphere, we would have a whole lot more radiation on the ground. So yeah, you could say that the magnetosphere is the reason why there is life on Earth. So that the magnetosphere itself is caused by, that's a quite wide topic, but I think the liquid metal core inside the Earth, which creates the Earth dynamo, which in turn creates the magnetic field, is probably the main reason why we have a magnetosphere. For example, I don't think that Mars has a liquid metal core and they don't have a magnetosphere, but they do have a very weak one, but it does heavily affect like the ground situation there with regards to radiation.
Sure. And now you are doing your doctoral studies. And could you please tell what is the direction, what are the focus in this doctoral studies?
Well, the topic is centennial, I think it's centennial evolution of the solar terrestrial connection or something, but the actual topic is like very long time scale magnetometer studies, and magnetometer is now an instrument to measure the magnetic field, especially on Earth's surface. And if you're studying the magnetic field and its changes in a very long time scale, such as 100 years, then you can study solar activity in bigger time scales, which is often more interesting than studying them in shorter time scales, where you can see like at what cycles is the sun operating on, and how it basically affects future space weather. And you can also glean effects from like past space weather from that, because you have quite a wide variety of old magnetometer measurements available even from the 19th century. And then you have these, let's say, secondary sources of measurements, such as ice core samples or stuff like that, where you can like get some kind of a clue on how the how the solar activity would have been on a time scale of thousands of years or stuff like that. But what I'm actually doing with my thesis right now is that it's on hold, because I'm like currently working full time at my current job. So,
but this is actually interesting from the perspective that you doing as a doctoral student, you are focusing more into science, I assume. But then in your work, it's more probably on the engineering side.
mm-hmm.
And how where is this line? Could you please like tell how you see the difference between scientist and engineer?
That's a good question. First off, I think I've often described myself as I'm like a physicist to the engineers and an engineer to the physicist, because I've done both of those jobs. So that means that like I understand how both fields operate, but I'm not like a super deep expert on either of those. So I'm a bit of a jack of all trades or something along those lines. And where would be the division in my work? It's like very concretely that the research part is more concerned with putting out peer-reviewed publication papers. and conducting actual, let's say, blue sky research into some interesting topics that have like significance in physics and open questions there and studies like that. Whereas the engineering is more concerned about, like, let's bluntly say that putting out a product that you have a work package and you have to complete it. There's some kind of a stated goal of getting some kind of it's not always like a ready-made block or ready-made machine that you get out from there. It could be some kind of like a process that you have to complete. For example, like this test procedure now has to be planned to its full extent. Planned, it doesn't have to even be that you conduct the tests. You simply like plan the tests, you state the requirements for them and make sure that like all the equipment is available and that everything, all the results are validated and stuff like that. In my mind, that's the clear distinction. Like the academic work and research is more about like you read papers and you write papers and you fiddle around with the data that you have. Fiddle around is maybe a bit crude term. Let's say that you go through the data and you analyze it and you plot it. Plotting is always good, I think. Visualization of whatever you're studying that's like the best thing. And whereas the engineering is more concerned about like you build like work package structures and you go through the work packages and you have plans and you have requirements and so on. Requirements is something that's, I would say, not found in the research side of things. That's more like you simply conduct the research and see what happens. Whereas
But if we take, let's say, science instrument, and can be on board of the satellite, let's say this magnetometer, and some kind of developments on top of this magnetometer, whose responsibility that would be? Of the scientist to develop this instrument, or scientist can specify requirement and engineer will develop this instrument?
Usually the latter. It's like that the engineers or whoever is like the principal investigator of the whole project sets like a list of requirements, which might actually be quite high level. Something such as like the highest level requirement is only that a phenomena has to be measured, and then from those high level requirements, like lower level requirements are derived, which probably will end up in something like we should use this type of instrument. It has to measure at this level of accuracy, something, and you have to measure like this particular parameter, and then those requirements are given to the engineering team to say that this is what you have to produce. This is the box that you have to make for us.
And if you have a team of mixed of engineers and the scientists, and let's say it's your company, and let's say we took you into the position of a company, and then the task is given to you that you will have a team where you need to mix scientists and engineers, and you need to pick the leader for that team. Will you pick engineer from that team to be leader, or the scientist to be the leader of the team?
I think it's difficult to say based purely upon the background, because like there are so many variables, like personal chemistry, what exactly is being done there, what's the level of expertise, and like are those people like suited for leading a whole team? Also in this kind of, in my experience in any academic work, or let's say workplace where you have lots of academic people, there's like, especially in Finland, there's not a whole lot of hierarchy, meaning that who is the team lead is not like, it's maybe not so critical, because everyone is expected to be quite autonomous. Everyone is expected to express their opinions, and they are quite free to say that like, I don't think we should be doing this in this way, we should be doing it in another way. So there's not like this kind of like a strict hierarchy where someone is the boss and he gets all the credit and he gets all the responsibility and so on. But from getting like things done, I would probably pick an engineer to lead the team, because like let's say the more research-oriented way of working often has the bad habit of taking quite a lot of time. So it's better to have like an engineer who is like very familiar with the deadlines and this kind of more structured way of working. But this entirely depends on what we are doing. If it's like more along the lines of like more creative problem. For example, let's say that your instrument has some kind of an issue. The instrument measurement data is not what you would expect. You're not entirely sure like what is the cause for it. Then it might be very good to have some kind of like a research-oriented person who knows how to think outside of the box or do some weird shit with the device to get it doing what you want and so on. So I'm going to end with this kind of very vague answer that depends.
Well, the question, of course, was quite general, I admit. But have you seen those people, like you said, that do you need to have PhD or is PhD training you to do this kind of weird thing and get what you need from the instrument, as you just mentioned?
I would say that if it's PhD somehow connected to like actually handling measurement data and stuff like that, then yeah, definitely. Then it gets you like there among several other places. Like the PhD education is quite extensive.
Now, also you mentioned that eventually that you might probably take engineer, put as a lead, to give this better following the time plans, and I think this is quite common when you have a company, you have business, you need to make money, and this dictates you this time and the scope. But from the research perspective, you have mindset maybe, why not try this and that? But if you want to do disruptive technology, if you want to really invent something really useful and something really unique, novel, how would you balance this in terms of the business? How much you can afford to do this kind of research, and how much you need to put this kind of practical limits?
I think it's like just having the, let's say, the more creative personnel on the team is good. They can be led by like a more, I don't want to say focus-oriented engineer, let's say more corporate-oriented engineer. Because if you are like, if you are very competent in your leadership, then you will like give enough breathing room for your people to do what they do best. So basically you make sure that the stuff gets delivered on time, but then you let the more creative people do their thing, and then you can like get your problem solved. This kind of like a very, let's say, straightforward simplification of how this kind of a process works.
It's just one of the terms which is coming up called deep tech or deep tech startups. I don't know if you heard like the startups.
I've read the term, but I haven't like read the descriptions. Feel free to enlighten me on it.
Well, I'm also learning myself, and that was also in one of the intros that I learned the first time about that. But I think it's something where you say, our business will not pay off in 10 years because we need to do deep research. This is so deep that wait really long before it will bring some fruits.
Yeah.
But if you look into space technology landscape of different companies and the startups, do you see there this kind of fitting into definition of deep tech, or it's rather more, I don't know, in the span of 1 or maximum 2 years already you need to generate profit?
I think I see both in the field. This actually, now that I think of a couple of examples, then the deep tech description fits them really well. I think it's often like a question of what is your like funding basis. If you have this kind of like long-term funding opportunities, then you can definitely do stuff like, let's develop this instrument for 10 years and then we'll launch it and so on. But you can also try to be fast. So with like less funding, less time, but then you can maybe get some kind of like results out. In the space field specifically, the distinction is often like old space and new space. Old space refers to these kind of like rather big aerospace companies and national actors and space agencies and so on, whereas new space refers to these kind of like smaller space technology startups, and especially the newer ones. And I think that is quite a clear example of these kind of like if you want to go at it fast or slow. Of course, some startups do have like a longer term funding, so they are still startups, but they are doing a project that takes like, let's say, 5+ years or something like that.
Mm-hmm. And if you talk about your experience with different institutions, companies, and university, so you basically worked in different work environments. One was this Aalto University and Finnish Meteorological Institute. Now it's like private corporation. What are the? How would you describe the main differences between among those work environments?
Main differences. Size of the organization is one. So the both the research institute and the universities had like there's a massive system in your background which handles like stuff like HR and your IT systems or quite a lot of other things. Whereas in startups, it's very like everything is rather hands-on, where you have not a very large system there in the background. But of course, the smaller companies are a lot more agile on what they can do, and you have a whole lot more say in what you are doing there and what the entire company is doing, as opposed to if you are in a big research institute or a university. So that's one. And then like the hiring policies are quite different. So in a university, you are basically hired as a student. You are first where you are not hired as the master's student, but after that you are basically first you are a doctoral student, then you might get a postdoc position, then you might get a assistant professorship, and then at the end of that long round is the tenured professorship. So it's more like most of the positions there are at the end of the day quite temporary. It's something like you are a postdoc for a couple of years and so on. Whereas in a company, it's often like you are hired and then you are in that position. Of course, there can be these kind of like temporal positions or whatnot, but it's possible to hire people like on a permanent basis. If you've been in the academic world where job security is low and there's quite a lot of, you have to put lots of hours into getting grant money and stuff like that, then when you go to a private company and then the job contract says that this is like, this applies indefinitely, that's quite something. That feels pretty good.
Unless you're on the tenure track.
Yeah, then of course, but that takes lots of time.
And tell me about the time when you received critical feedback. Have you had this actually situations in life?
I've had like I've had critical feedback concerning my peer-reviewed papers. I've had pretty good critical feedback. I've had pretty horrible critical feedback. Stuff like, you are not worthy of using this instrument data. You should not be doing this. Please go away. Stuff like that from an anonymous source, and that felt quite bad. But of course, in day-to-day work, you also receive like critical feedback based on a number of things that you do. But that part about a peer review paper like hit quite badly.
But this is more in the when you're a student and in this kind of setup. But have you had this case when you were receiving this as an employee?
Yes.
And how did you feel? Was it difficult for you to take this critical feedback?
Oddly enough, when working at a company, it like, I don't think it was that difficult. It was more like it's a good thing when someone gives it to you straight, especially when it happens like face to face and you realize that everything didn't go exactly as planned. It's just probably to do with the fact that like the job situation is so much different. When you are in the academia, it's like you are always getting these kind of, let's say, 1-year contracts back to back. But when you're working at a company, then it's a more stable platform, so you don't have to worry about like this might impact how I'm hired, how I'm employed in the future.
So if you're in company, then you can even ignore the.
No, well, not exactly. It like it changes your own like way of handling it internally. Like it's, or maybe I've slightly become some kind of a professional where it's like better to somebody's giving me feedback. Excellent, I will learn from this. As opposed to being young and inexperienced, and I'm terrified. Like, oh God, I fucked up. Like, what happens next?
And now you're leading the team and also communicating with many different people. Have you had this kind of situation where someone told you or you felt that you are too harsh or too firm with people, and that you felt that, or someone told you that you're stubborn or inflexible?
Actually, no. I think I'm a pretty I'm a pretty diplomatic person. I don't like confrontations. So that might be the fact that I haven't at least been told that I was like too confrontational or too like stubborn or stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. But being diplomatic, is it efficient when you, let's say, someone is clearly doing wrong, but that person thinks that he or she is doing this right and like so confident? How would you tell to that person that actually no, this is wrong?
It's a difficult situation, but I think then you just have to straighten your back and go to them, and it's always best to do this face to face, and then simply like state that like things are not going according to the plan. But it's not especially like it's not fun. It's like it's
but
not.
I understand this is not an easy question, but imagine if that's me, that person, you need to tell me. How would you tell this?
Quite easily. We are not like intimately familiar, so like there's like a certain, let's say, mental distance there. So it would be easier to say that like it's what you are doing right now is not exactly working. You have to work on it, and of course it's always you have to state exactly like what is not working. You cannot simply say that you are doing a shit job. You have to like pinpoint the locations that, for example, this solution that you've chosen is not appropriate for this problem. You have to change it or some stuff like that. So you have to go into the like it's better to go into rather detailed than be really vague about like what's working or not working.
Have you had the situations when you received vague feedback and then you were puzzled what exactly was meant?
Yeah, a couple of times. Like this kind of like where there's like a, let's say, weird encounter where you're thinking afterwards like what was the actual reason for that discussion, and you're thinking in your head that there must be something else happening in the background. Yeah, I've had that many times.
And how did you handle this? What did you do? Or you just ignored?
I mean, just ignored, because if it's something like the other person acting weird because of some thing that it's not connected to you, you shouldn't dwell too much on it. It's not like very healthy. This goes very heavily now into some kind of office and politics, psychological things.
This is actually a good point about the health, the mental health. Because you can just assume a lot of things in your head, and which is not true, and which can really depress or upset you.
Yes. There's no easy workaround for that, but you should always keep in mind that like not everything is like your personal fault, or like not if some personnel like are very rude towards you or otherwise inconsiderate, it might be something that has absolutely nothing to do with you. So you shouldn't like dwell too much on it. Shouldn't hang up on that. Like why was he or she so mean to me? You shouldn't like getting this kind of like mindset.
Have you had in your life, in your career, both life and career, the situations where you had to take big risk? You know, this is a risk, and so you had to take brave decisions.
Yes.
Can you provide some example?
I have to think on that a bit. Nothing too personal. I think like every time I've changed my job, it has been like a big risk, and I've heavily stressed about that because there is certain this even if you know that the new thing would probably be better, the fear of change is often quite. It might even be quite debilitating. People tend to gravitate towards what is like familiar and safe, even though you know that you probably shouldn't be doing this anymore, that the better opportunity is just around the corner. You just have to.
But this changing of jobs was, you were first finding another job and then you changing, or you quit and then you found another?
I've never quit a job. I've always like either ran out of contract and the next one has been waiting, but I've never like quit a job. So I'm not that brave of a person. So, or at least like I've always had something lined up next to it. I have never done this kind of like, today I don't feel like doing this anymore. I will immediately quit, and then something good will come around eventually. So
how would you feel if you hired someone in your company, and that person after a couple of months tells you that he or she wants to cancel the contract because found just a better opportunity?
That would be really annoying. I think it would be like a loss for everyone concerned. It would be a loss for the company because we decided to hire someone and then he or she left. And it would also be like if you have to change jobs so rapidly, then I think also the hired person in this case would not have been happy with the arrangement either. So it would be this kind of like a nobody wins situation. I would really like to know like what are the actual reasons for it, and I would try to probe this person on like why are you changing and so on. But at the end of the day, if someone wants to change their jobs, there's not a whole lot you can do besides like what's stated in the contract. So,
but in most cases, it could be this better salary, and then. But if person worked for short time but was diligent and tried his or her best in the job, but then there is offer which is like 2 times more high salary. Is it still ethical for that person to leave, or the person needs some kind of sacrifice, maybe increasing own living standard, but to commit to the company?
That depends on what's the situation with the person. If the money is short and you need more money and more money is available, who can blame someone for changing jobs at that point? If the money is already like really good and then it's simply changing, like then maybe, but I don't know, like I wouldn't stigmatize anyone for changing jobs like that. And besides, there might be so many reasons. It might be that you get more money from the new job, you get more like opportunities to advance in the new job, or you simply did not like the work environment that you ended up in. Or it might be that everything is as promised, but when you end up in your job, it's like not fun actually doing it. You're very diligent and very efficient in what you're doing, but you simply don't find it fun. And then you're like, I probably shouldn't be here. Then it's like, it's difficult to articulate that, especially to the like company that you work with, that sorry, this didn't work out for like hard to describe reasons. There are so many things. So, but of course, always if you make like a hiring decision, you hope it to be like long term, because it's actually quite expensive to hire people, especially if they quit in 2 months. So then it's like quite a lot of wasted effort and so on.
But what do you do to retain people? Let's say you see that all around there is kind of flow and there's kind of turnover, and you as a leader, you have this goal to improve retention. What will you do?
Let's say that if you're like a team lead, you're not in the management, so you can't like affect the salaries too much. Of course, salaries is one thing. Another thing is to run your own unit or team or whatever is the size of the thing that you're leading, like as well as possible, so that like things get actually done. Because if your unit is not like functioning, then who can blame anyone for leaving that? And then like make sure that work morale stays high. If someone is like clearly unhappy or there is some other problems, then you have to tackle those issues quite fast. And even if there are no issues, make sure that people are happy to come to work. So like do whatever it takes to like keep morale high. And that's a bit of a vague answer, because it's like you have to assess these on a case by case basis. Is it a good idea to take everyone out for after work beers? That works for some, but not everyone. Not everyone enjoys that kind of thing. But have something that like the workplace stays like, but it doesn't exactly have to be fun, but it has to be like at least tolerable, so that it's not like a really horrible place. And then I would also state that like clearly communicate to your team members why you are doing something and what's like the end result, so that they feel that they are achieving something greater and not like doing being stuck inside of a black box that takes input A and gives out output B, because then you are not like, you don't feel like you're doing something valuable. You're just like cogs in a machine, as opposed to like where we complete these 3 test steps, then this product will be qualified and ready, and we can do cool stuff with it. Things like that.
That's actually, I agree with you regarding this, especially regarding this point about understanding why they impact. But when it comes to science, it can be so, let's say, deep.
Mm-hmm.
Do you always have you had the situations where you were lacking the context? You were thinking you're doing something like really small and very specific thing, and you don't really understand what could be the like value for humanity or what we eventually will get.
Yeah, I've had situations like that in some academic projects where it's like where the high level objectives are not, they might even not be like public. Not to do to some kind of like classified research stuff, mainly like questionable management stuff. So like, but I have been in this kind of situation where it's like rather unclear what is actually being attempted here. And then it's difficult to like do your own thing when you're not entirely clear on what's the high-end goal.
But when you had these situations, you just accepted it or you did something to improve this?
I like eventually accepted. I tried to like push for some answers, but they were not forthcoming. This goes rather heavily into some academic politics, so I will not like elaborate further.
In companies, you mentioned that there is not so much of this hierarchy and it's more like egalitarian. Is it different in academia role that, I mean, it could be some kind of like order, without questions you have to do this?
I would say that in some cases, some like research objectives are like they are more hierarchical. It's something like, let's say, a professor that leads some kind of a research unit in a university or a research project, or maybe an entire department. They might set like goals that your group will now study this phenomena using this data set. And then that might be like quite, or it might be that there is a paper that we have which has this result. You will now study this result or use the results obtained from there, and you will tie your work around it. So that's quite restrictive in some cases. Of course, it does also make more sense that they are all in this kind of like a pipeline, that we need to complete these and these and these, but that's quite different to this kind of like rather free-form research that you can do in some cases. But I would say that in academic situations, it can be rather heavy-handed. Oftentimes it's connected to like funding applications or grants or stuff like that, that you have like a large grant to study this particular phenomena. Then you have to tie everything around it towards this particular phenomena, because that is the focus, and that is where the money is coming to everyone's salaries. So then you're basically doing as you are told.
Sure. What do you think was your greatest achievement so far?
great achievement. I think probably getting the Dragliner SITT application accepted and getting the project manager position, I think I like it the best. We were not the consortium lead, we were like a subcontractor on that. But I did quite a lot of work on the application itself. I really enjoyed working on it. And I think it's a really well-made project in the sense that it's been quite meticulously planned and it ties into earlier similar work. And I think I like it best.
I think this is the mechanism developed by Dr. Pekka Janhonen that you're going to test in this project, is it? Or
yes, that's like that is the plasma brake, which is a propellantless deorbiting technology. That itself is a spin-off from the electric solar wind sail. And both of those are like Pekka Janhonen's inventions from Finnish Meteorological Institute.
And I think this is now there is more and more. I think in Finland it was quite long ago already. Discussions about sustainability as overall, but now it's getting attention on a global scale more and more. But when people talk about sustainability, they mostly talk about climate on Earth preservation. Do you think it could be this topic of sustainability could be expanded to to what you're doing with this project, this ESA project regarding deorbiting?
Space sustainability is also already this kind of like a buzzword that's being thrown around, and there are several like actual steps that are being implemented with regards to this kind of space sustainability. Often in space, it means that if you put something in space, let's say a satellite, then you have regulations that you have to follow to make sure that you don't leave any space debris behind when your mission ends. So oftentimes space sustainability is related to deorbiting. So basically, if you have a satellite, it has completed its science mission and it's now at its end of life. Now you have to get rid of it. Oftentimes it's that you lower the orbit so that it burns up in the atmosphere. And that's like a good way to discard it after it has completed its mission, and then you don't leave any unnecessary debris in orbit which could collide with other debris and cause this kind of cascading effect known as the Kessler syndrome, where entire orbital shells are rendered basically unusable because of the debris. So my interest in space sustainability is often like this deorbiting and how to make it efficiently. I think efficiency is the best word because the plasma brake is like very lightweight and it doesn't use any propellant, so it's like a good choice in that regard to a space application because like the mass and power budgets are critical if you design something into space.
But here we are talking for now about the low Earth orbit.
It can low Earth orbit mostly, yeah, but you can expand it to other orbits as well. But the low Earth orbit is like the most crowded. So oftentimes when you think about the space debris issue, then low Earth orbit is that's the most at risk.
Do you think this is also an issue, this kind of labeled graveyard between the GEO and the LEO, this I think it was called MEO?
Yeah.
Where these telecommunication satellites are like pushed down after the end of the lifetime?
I don't think it's an issue because stuff that you put up there stays there for a long time. It's something like if your satellite platform has the mass budget and the power budget and the propellant to go to those very high orbits, and then you move yourself to a graveyard orbit, air drag would bring you down to some, let's say, more dangerous orbits in timescale of thousands of years or something. So I don't think that is an issue. So if within the next 1,000 years, I think we've either fixed the space debris issue or then we have some other issues as a species. So that's not the problem. But the LEO orbits are quite concerning. So any kind of solutions there would be quite welcome.
And a bit funny, but half serious also question. If you offered to fly to Mars, will you accept this offer?
I would say probably not, because like I don't foresee it as a very pleasant journey or a very pleasant existence over there. So,
Even if Elon Musk going there.
especially, I don't know, this kind of like I don't think it would be for me, this kind of like a pioneering work on living over there. So
About Elon Musk, I sense some a bit not very happy feelings about him. Is it related to this Starlink?
personally, I don't have a massive problem with Starlink, even though Starlink itself is quite a large light pollution and space debris issue, but at least like their space debris mitigation plan is actually pretty okay, and they were faster to implement stricter like regulatory models than the FCC, which is the US like the Federal Communications Commission, I think. But yeah, so the Starlink, like even though there are quite a lot of like satellites over there, and they are a space debris issue in itself, they have a pretty good plan on like how they're actually handling it. Personally, like let's say that Elon Musk's public persona is not very pleasant. I don't know how much of this stuff you want to leave at the video.
Well, I was referring, since you're dealing with the with the space technology science research, that because I know in the beginning when the Starlink was just launched, there was explicitly this light put on, just kind of maybe as a promo.
Yeah,
and I think it made unhappy a lot of people doing Earth space observation.
yeah. And the size of the whole constellation is a bit concerning. So that is one thing. Like, and there are like several competing similar solutions. So there will be lots of satellites. Of course, that's basically more business for us, because we would happily sell a deorbiting solution to any such mega constellation. So, but it's a
Let them launch. You will help to bring down.
Yes, that's the thing.
Great. And the last question in our job interview is, what's your salary expectation?
My salary expectation for a leadership position in a company, most likely like much bigger than what I'm currently working with. Let's start the bidding at like 4K.
Thank you. And that was the job interview. Now we are finishing the job interview mode, and it's time for feedback.
All right.
So how did you feel?
Super surprised you dug up the ninth age from my CV. A bit of a happy surprise there. Also Metal Club Mirka getting mentioned. That was fun. I think like the whole system worked out quite well. It was a bit weird that you singled out that I had worked at ESA, but I definitely not have. Sorry if pointing out that was a bit I don't know, too much impromptu in the start of the interview. Yeah. Otherwise, like, yeah, you did your homework. You had read my CV quite thoroughly, so that was good.
Well, I'm really happy that you shared the CV, because compared to your LinkedIn, LinkedIn is not so detailed, and I wouldn't learn much.
Yeah, I don't use LinkedIn like a whole lot. I basically like check up on people, what they are doing there, and who is this person emailing me and stuff like that. So it's more like I don't know, this kind of address book. Who am I now dealing with, and so on. So
you're not taking LinkedIn seriously, I mean, in terms of like...
Well, no, I mean, I'm just pretty inactive. I'm taking it very seriously, but I'm not just like I'm not pushing for content. But there's nothing wrong with the platform. I like it personally quite a lot. So also like, I like how it's like very, very business-like, no nonsense, that you can simply put like, this is my position, this is my work experience. You don't have to put like a whole lot of flair and hype words and stuff like that if you don't feel like it. As for the interview, I think those were interesting questions about like how to function in a leadership position, and like how to be, and those are good in the sense that you can apply them to almost any job. It doesn't like matter like what I do for a living. So that was really good also.
Was it similar to your previous experience when you were applying for like actual positions and going for interview?
we went here a bit deeper into, let's say, the psychology of things. You don't often hear those kind of questions at a normal interview, and also in a normal interview. Well, this is an interview. It's evil to call it normal interview. Another job interview. Often the questions are rather detailed regarding that particular job, and I would at least myself ask like really detailed questions, such as like what IT systems you are using, and even very mundane things like how often, like how much do your employees spend their work hours here at the office? How much do they remote work? How can I get a car parked? How can I get here with public transportation? Because those things actually matter quite a lot when you actually run the job and so on. Of course, we can't do it here because there's like,
Well, yeah, this is a fictional company, and then I will have to invent.
Yeah. I wouldn't add it to this kind of concept. I think this works really well. That it's more like this kind of like the interview is the MacGuffin that simply starts the show, and then you can just like carry on talking about whatever.
But you are right that there was a lot of focus on psychology side and people skills, soft skills, because here is assumed that you have impressive experience, CV as engineer. Now you're going for the leadership position, and this leadership part is not maybe so clear from the CV. Maybe you achieved a lot of technical things, but how good you are with people, and that's why it's more focused on that side.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think if you have done this leadership positions a lot, then you have a lot more input there, and then you could state that you have like been in a leadership position in 3 different companies or something like that. But I haven't, so I basically just stated that I'm research team lead and that's it. Personally, I don't feel like adding some kind of like text there where I state that I am an excellent team player. I know to work as part of a team. Everyone is expected how to work as part of a team. That's like you don't get any points for that, at least in my opinion. So
yeah, it's kind of being common sense. Or
yes,
just.
But like if you like want to emphasize some kind of like that what kind of leadership skills you have, you can always state like how long you have worked at a leadership position, or then put some leadership stuff there that's not from the work, such as from your hobbies or whatever. And those are a good substitute before you like get to the like, let's say, the professional environment, that you can state that I like doing these kind of things on my free time, and based upon this and this other work that I've done, I think I would fit for this role. That's not a bad way to like structure why you should be chosen for something.
Exactly, because indeed, when you haven't had experience being leader, but your first time applying, then there are those hobbies which can actually imply that you have, if you're a good team player, and then if you have this kind of good communication skills, leadership skills.
Yeah.
But to the person who is watching us, and let's say that person is a researcher and wants to become a lead researcher, to take in this area some lead position, what advice would you give to that person?
If you stay in the academia, then like, I don't know, grow a heart of stone, because it's one hell of a road if you go to the tenured professor position where you actually get the leadership parts. Make sure that you want to do that, because that's like you might have to sacrifice quite a lot of stuff to get there. And if in a private company, then that's a bit different. It also depends on like what size of a company on, because it's quite a different thing to work in a very large corporation as opposed to a small startup. What I would say to someone preparing for the leadership position: make sure to be prepared to handle a lot of responsibility. It's a bit different than just working as an employee and doing what you are supposed to be doing when you have to actually carry out the responsibilities. Be prepared to make hard decisions and have hard talks with people. It's oftentimes when you have to be in a leadership position, you have to give these kind of like, you have to be very strict with some people. And like the reasons might be like many. You have oftentimes you don't have to discipline anyone in these kind of engineering circles, but the methods they are using or stuff like that, they might not be very optimal, and then you have to tell them that we need to change this up. This doesn't work. You have to do it like this.
Thank you. And that was Pyry Lauri Samuli Peitso in the episode of Leaders and Engineers. Thank you for listening and watching us.
Thank you. And thanks again for having me here.